Greetings, folks. Welcome, one and all. Welcome to the Council for British Research in the Levant's latest webinar today, which is entitled Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem from 1850 to 1948 by Professor Awad Halabi. A few notes as everybody gets comfortable and enters the webinar room. The Council for British Research in the Levant is an independent UK research charity and membership organization that exists to conduct and support and promote humanities and social science research on the Levant and Levantine Middle East. We are part of the British Academy's International Research Institutes, of which there are 7, and we have over a 100-year history in the region with offices in London, Amman, and Jerusalem. Today's webinar is being hosted from the Jerusalem branch of the CBRL, which is also known as the Kenyan Institute. And I'm happy to also say that Dr. Halabi himself is actually located in the Institute today. I must put out there that we apologize to him for being unable to host a public lecture where we would be able to host people on our premises because the audiovisual hybrid nature of our infrastructure was not fully finished yet, but we're happy to have this webinar and be in contact with everybody out there on the World Wide Web. In fact, there were almost 60 different signups today from all over the world, so we're very excited that there is such interest out there for this topic, which I myself am actually very looking forward to because I think this is an under-researched history of, a period of Palestinian history that needs to be understood better. So I'm very much looking forward to that today. We hope you enjoy today's webinar. So that's today's lecture, as I said, is entitled Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem from 1850 to 1948. Dr. Halabi is an associate professor in the Department of History at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, in the United States, and he teaches classes in Middle Eastern history. He's also the coordinator of the Minor and Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies and has published articles in edited books and in Jerusalem Quarterly and the Journal of Palestine Studies. He conducted his doctoral work at the University of Toronto, and today's webinar is based on his forthcoming book, which is titled Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem, 1850 to 1948, the same title of this webinar, which will be coming out from University of Texas Press in late 2022. So without further ado, allow me to hand off to Dr. Awad Halabi, Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem, 1850 to 1948. Please take it away, Awad.
Thank you very much, Tafiq. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you to Dr. Tafiq Haddad and Claire Halliday for organizing this talk. And thank you to the CBRL for sponsoring this talk. Much of the research for this talk was conducted, as Tafiq said, when I was a resident at the Kenyan, so I appreciate the opportunity to deliver this talk here in Jerusalem, and really no need to apologize, Tafiq. I know it's not easy to conduct renovations in a pandemic era, and thank you all for joining this Zoom talk, and I will really do my best to keep it in the 40-minute time frame, stretching it just a bit, but I don't want to tax your patience. So I'd like to talk to you today about my research on an Islamic festival in honor of the Prophet Moses held in Jerusalem during the era of late Ottoman, 1850 to 1917, and British rule, 1917 to 1948, which is the basis for my book, for my forthcoming book. Let me give you a bit of background to the topic. Well, I'm sure many of you are aware, Islam is an Abrahamic faith that recognizes the messages sent by earlier prophets recognized in the Judeo-Christian biblical traditions, such as those of the Prophet Moses or or the prophet Abraham. In this tradition of recognizing biblical figures, a religious tradition emerged of venerating their tombs, such as the tomb of Abraham in Hebron, or of revered biblical figures and of Quranic figures, as well as tombs of Sufis, such as this one in southern Morocco. These tombs were recognized as sacred places to perform pilgrimage, ziyarah, where a pilgrim would seek blessing, the barakah of the entombed. Many of these larger shrines also held annual festivals known as mulids or mawsim, honoring the sacred figure, becoming a large celebration, attracting pilgrims from larger cities and the rural areas, both men and women. This is the larger context I study, the 13th century shrine dedicated to the tomb of the prophet Moses, Nabi Musa in the Islamic tradition, located 8 miles southwest of Jericho. And this is the aerial view of it. And here is Jericho, if you're not as familiar with it. Moses is the most mentioned figure, human figure in the Quran. And there are multiple sites that that claim to be the tomb of Moses, but the Jericho shrine would become the most famous after the powerful Egyptian Mamluk ruler Sultan Baybars founded the shrine in 1269. At first, there was just a dome over the tomb and an adjoining mosque. That largest green dome is where the tomb of Moses is located, and the adjoining green domes are where the mosque is located. Later, the shrine expanded and it became the site of traditional worship. Traditional worship mostly means where consisted of pilgrims, mostly from Jerusalem and the southern areas of south of Jerusalem and south of the Palestine southern regions, arriving to the shrine and engaging in acts of worship with minimal oversight from religious officials. These popular forms of devotion included venerating the tomb of Moses, lighting votive candles there, touching the sacred covering of the tomb. This is an era when the boundaries between what is referred to as popular Islam and official Islam were blurred. Members of the ulama, the Islamic religious scholars, worshipped alongside and participated in the same rituals as villagers, both men and women, Bedouins, Sufis, all together. My focus, though, is on how a modern official festival was established in the mid-19th century during the late Ottoman era and an era of British rule in Palestine. I argue that sacred spaces and pilgrimage centers are arenas of competing discourses. I study how the participants of the festival from 1850 to 1948, those from more powerful social classes, such as Ottoman officials, urban notables, and after World War I, Arab nationalist leaders, British colonial officials, and those with more limited political influence, such as younger Arab activists, Palestinian peasants, women, Bedouin, Sufis, each of them attempted in their own way to structure the symbols of the ceremony, the symbolic order of the ceremonies. What are these symbols? These symbols that each group sought to control included the rhetoric projected at the festival, the ritual performances, the images projected, the participation of pilgrims, and the direction of processional routes. By ordering the symbols of the celebrations, each social group attempted to define how they understood a range of social and political messages about modernity, identity, politics, Islam, gender issues, and colonialism. This is the larger context of this study. And in the mid-19th century, the larger context in the mid-19th century is when the Ottoman state initiated new modern reforms, introducing secular laws, advancing Western technology, as political leaders, Ottoman leaders, and the elite began donning Western fashion and sending their children to schools based on a Western education. These modern reforms allowed the Ottoman state to collect taxes more widely, conduct censuses and recruit soldiers, and especially to impose the authority of the Ottoman state and urban officials over rural people. And in the 1860s, the Ottoman state also established Jerusalem's first municipal council. The newly formed Jerusalem Municipal Council took control of the festival and transformed it from a traditional celebration at the Prophet Moses Shrine into an official ceremony located and based in Jerusalem. Palestinians today may have a memory of the festival as a great nationalist celebration, a time when Palestinians from throughout the country convened in Jerusalem, raising their village and town banners and shouting slogans against the British and Zionists. Or they may be familiar with the story that Salah ad-Din founded the festival after conquering Jerusalem in 1187 as a way to assemble Muslims in Jerusalem to protect the city when many Christians are celebrating Easter. But Jerusalem never had an association with the festival until the Jerusalem's municipality initiated these changes in the mid-19th century. The first changes introduced to the modern ceremonies required pilgrims to be organized as contingents, termed mawsim, to gather first in Jerusalem. They entered Jerusalem raising their village and town banners, led by Sufis playing drums and playing cymbals, crying out religious and folk ballads. Each contingent would also conform to a set schedule and route, where the Nablus pilgrims in yellow entered through the Damascus Gate a week before Orthodox Good Friday, and the Nablus contingent entered on Orthodox Palm Sunday. The Islamic tradition and the Arabs of the Levant often tied religious holidays to the fixed Christian solar calendar, especially the Julian calendar of the Eastern churches. And so it wasn't unfamiliar, dating back to the early years of the festival in the 16th century, to have the festival conform to the Orthodox Easter calendar. The new rituals Jerusalem's Municipal Council introduced were really a symbolic way to express the new authority of the urban notables in the Ottoman state in the modern era. The municipal councilors and the Ottoman officials had become the impresarios of the new festival, choreographing new ritual actors such as the Jerusalem mayor and the Ottoman governor, and assigning notable families and religious officials new ritual roles and duties. For example, high-ranking Ottoman officials joined members of Jerusalem's elite and religious authorities in newly invented rites, such as unfurling the sacred banner of the prophet Moses. Municipal officials also, or the Ottoman military band, escorting the pilgrims as they entered and exited the holy city. Or that they set up a tent on a high point on the road to Jericho, or Ras al-Amud, where religious officials led prayers and blessed the pilgrims and banners, and where the Ottoman military band also escorted them. Clearly, the festival was no longer just a religious affair, but a civic concern, or an example of civil religion, where civic officials like the mayor and the Jerusalem notables, the Ottoman governor, and the Ottoman military band were able to participate and even lead a religious celebration. The new ceremonies in Jerusalem did not stress the popular veneration of Moses at the shrine. Rather, they upheld a new social order and culture of late Ottoman Jerusalem that the modern Ottoman state would continue to respect traditional Islamic culture in an era of modern secular reforms. In many ways, the peasants and Bedouin pilgrims had been transformed into an audience in where they were there to validate the symbols that the main ritual actors, the elite, projected. In the role of an audience, the pilgrims were there to validate these messages, or in the words of the founder of the modern Olympics, the crowd has a part to play, a part of consecration, meaning they were there to fulfill and validate the messages of the festival organizers. After Britain occupied Palestine in 1917, the Prophet Moses Festival continued to change as new groups attempted to order its symbols and rhetoric to promote their own unique agendas. The British colonial rulers knew they faced opposition and discontent from Palestine's Arab, Muslim, and Christian populations for supporting the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, despite the Jewish population forming 10% of the country. As a tactic to appear as respectful to Palestine's Islamic culture, British colonial officials appropriated the duties the previous Ottoman officials used to perform at the festival, such as leading the pilgrims with a marching band. In the first Moses festival celebrated under British rule, Ronald Storrs, the British governor of Jerusalem, was the first to encourage British participation to the same extent as the Ottomans had once performed. As he said, the festival exposed a dilemma, for it marked the end of 400 years of Ottoman rule in Jerusalem. Enthusiastically, Storrs encouraged the army to provide gun salutes as the pilgrims exited the Haram al-Sharif. He collected a regimental band to lead the ceremony, and he proudly boasted that the Mutasarrifs, the Ottoman governor's duties, I fulfilled myself. Storrs' approach to the festival resembled what the religious scholar Jonathan Z. Smith said about the Babylonian slapping ceremony, which Smith argues was held at a time of foreign occupation in Babylon. At this Akitu slapping ceremony during the Akitu festival, the rite of ceremoniously slapping the king by the high priest attempted to breach the incongruity of a people's ideals, native kingship that rules in cosmic harmony with the gods, and the historical realities of foreign rulers on the throne and the potential for cosmic chaos. In questions the high priest asked the king as he was being slapped, as the king was being slapped, the king answered in the negative. I did not destroy Babylon. I did not forget its rights. The ritual reconciled the ideal of native kingship with the reality of foreign rule. Through a similar act of ritual dissimulation, British participation helped to ease the contradiction between the independence Arabs in Palestine sought from the reality of British occupation, embodied in Storrs saying, the Mutasharrif's duties I fulfilled myself. Actually, there is this great film filmed by the British military, which shows the first festival in 1918, and it's with the Imperial War Museum, and you can email me if you want a full citation to it. But you're going to see here Storrs entering the Sharia court, and here's the Qadi saluting him, the judge, and here's the mayor, Musa Kazim al-Husseini. They're going to present him the sacred banners just as they did the Ottoman governor of Jerusalem. So Storrs is taking over this role, and you can kind of get the sense of the anxiety, nervousness of presenting, of him being included really in the first time a British officials is participating in an Islamic ceremony. This is only 4 months after the beginning of British rule, and they're still fighting in Palestine in the north at this time. So this is a very kind of nervous era, and you see here stores. He's going to place the sacred banners on the stage, and just as the Ottoman governor. If I had time, you should really try to watch this film. It's a remarkable piece that captures this festival and culture. I want to continue, but I'm a little pressed for time. And okay, but really, it's a great film. It's quite a valuable source. Well, in the era of British rule, other groups began to mobilize the symbols of the festival to promote a political agenda. One group was Palestine's nationalist leaders. Arab nationalist leaders, such as the Mufti of Jerusalem and Hajjamin al-Husseini, attempted to order the festival to highlight his role as chief Islamic representative in the new state of Palestine. Now, the Nebi Musa festival wouldn't just be a festival mainly for the people of the Sanjak, or the province of Jerusalem in the south, but for everyone in this new country. Especially after the 1929 El-Barak Western Wall violence, the Mufti began to invite pilgrims from throughout Palestine to participate in the Nebi Musa festival. They arrived from centers that had not traditionally attended, such as the coastal and northern parts of Palestine. While the Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, helped to nationalize the festival, he didn't invite pilgrims to diffuse an idea of nationhood, nor to assemble pilgrims with the intent to mobilize them against British colonialism and Zionism. Rather, he did it to secure his image as national leader at a time when other groups were threatening his and his family's monopoly over leading the Palestinian nationalist movement. This is why his supporters upheld his conservative brand of politics, denouncing Zionism and while in nationalist chants, but avoiding any chants critical of the British or calling for violence. In fact, the Palestinian leadership regularly published in Arabic newspapers bayans, statements, calling on pilgrims to attend the festival peacefully and avoiding any violence. After violence had erupted at the 1920 festival, killing 4 Jews and 5 Arabs, the British relied on the Arab leadership to quell any potential conflicts that could arise at the festival. And really, the entire raison d'etre of the Arab leadership was based on containing violence, that was their role in the eyes of the British. There is actually another brief video that shows the episode of this, of when the violence erupts in 1920. And again, it's from a museum available digitally in Bristol, and I can give you a citation to that as well, or a link to it. The Mufti became the cynosure of attention at the festival, the center of attraction, appearing at the rear of the procession, bearing the revered Prophet Moses banner. Representatives of groups the Mufti controlled, such as the Supreme Muslim Council, greeted pilgrims, and pilgrims were instructed to pass his office at the Haram al-Sharif. But a younger generation of Arab nationalist activists also participated, hoping to promote their own version of identity and politics. Unlike the Mufti, these younger Arab nationalists didn't define identity to Palestine solely, but to the larger Arab region. They also rejected the cautious approach to oppose British colonialism, calling for resistance against the British and Zionists. The anthems they chanted at the festival, and the unauthorized speeches their supporters delivered, which they could be jailed for delivering. You had to be authorized to deliver a speech. Upheld an Arab identity, not solely a Palestinian identity, and encouraged and incited violent resistance and militancy rather than diplomacy that the elite nationalist leaders promoted. The youth played on familiar Nahda, Arab Renaissance themes of the late 19th century. Nahda themes of Arab culture, identity, and a fallen Arab civilization that demanded Arabs roust themselves from this stupor. The chants at the festival made repeated references to dignified Arabs, our esteemed glory, the Arab glory, our nobility. Arab pride was personified as lions. Other chants demanded, one chant, for example, demanded, "O sons of nation, Beni and Ottoman, arise from continuous sleep and demand glory." The names the youth groups gave to their scouting troops that participated in the festival in the 1930s reflected their ideals of championing an Arab identity and resistance. The names the youth chose for their troops championed Islamic fighters such as Saladin resisting the Crusades, or contemporary political leaders such as King Ghazi I of Iraq, who was one of the few leaders of an independent Arab state, as well as names championing resistance, such as al-Jihad, the holy struggle, and the Mujahideen, the troop of holy fighters. These scouting names reveal a younger generation turning to their faith and Arab culture to define a political agenda in contradistinction to the conservative approach of Palestine's Arab leadership. Peasants and Bedouin, the vast majority of the pilgrims, though, also defined the hegemonic messages of the elite. They focused their energies on the ritual activities at the shrine. At the shrine, pilgrims worshipped at the tomb, Sufis conducted mystical performances, and families celebrated the circumcision of young boys. Families attended with children and enjoyed a joyous few days at the shrine. Unlike the rituals in Jerusalem, there was no division between elite and pilgrims. Really, the new modern ceremonies are where those distinction between popular and official, elite and popular Islam are created. Nor are there are few divisions between men and women, where women could join Sufi dances, chant religious eulogies, and play musical instruments. The commitment villagers had to participating at the festival could outweigh their interest in joining the larger nationalist processions in Jerusalem. There are periodic episodes from the 1930s when pilgrims defied being forced to march in Jerusalem as part of the larger nationalist processions. Rather, they insisted on marching as part of villagers, identifying themselves as villagers, raising their village banners. In 1931, when the British barred the village of Ain Karam from marching as their own separate mawqif contingent, raising their own village banner, the villagers boycotted the closing ceremonies. Even though they were given the opportunity to join with their village banners in the larger processions in Jerusalem, but they would have been kind of lost in those larger ones. They wanted to participate just on their own. The Philistine Arabic newspaper correspondent remarked the villagers resented that they were not permitted to go out with their banners and their own parade. While they could still have joined other pilgrims in one national congregation, they instead chose to exercise a more familiar sentiment, which was to identify as villagers. And I argue that villagers maintained these local identities because the national framework, the national paradigm, couldn't protect them against British colonialism, Zionism, and market capitalism. It couldn't protect their hold on their land. It couldn't protect their ability to sell their raw produce. So they had to continue to rely on local identities to resist the threats to their access to land and their livelihood by British colonialism, Zionism, and market capitalism. Another interesting aspect of rural participation is of rural women. In Jerusalem, they attended as spectators in the modern festival. At the shrine, they worshiped as pilgrims. When I first began this study, I assumed women visited the shrine to escape the patriarchal environments they were living in, and that they saw greater freedom of the convivial atmosphere at the shrine that the shrine provided. Ottoman soldier Ihsan Turjaman, who was stationed in Jerusalem during World War I, echoed this sentiment. Upon seeing women congregating at the Haram al-Sharif for the 1915 festival, Prophet Moses Festival, he bemoaned how they yearned to attend, as he said, to be free of the pressures of their husbands and homes. Yet women attended along with members of their tribe or village, with many accounts highlighting little segregation between men and women, enjoying a convivial, joyous celebration where they could partake in folk traditions, singing and dancing. And they participated as pilgrims seeking blessings of the tomb of Moses to heal a sick child, or prayers for overcoming infertility. They would often be accused of cutting out the sacred banner of Moses so they could bring that back home to bless their children. The gender relations they conducted at the shrine and the forms of spiritual worship were no different than what they practiced in their home village or tribe. Visiting the Prophet Moses shrine was not an escape from patriarchy, but it reaffirmed how they regularly interacted with the men of their village or tribe, and how they worshiped regularly at shrines in their local community. The shrine and festival was not a liminal space separate from the real or profane world. It was an extension of how they regularly encountered or practiced their religious traditions and engaged in gender relations. Very briefly, I want to discuss what happens to the festival after 1948, as the shrine fell under the administration of Jordan and then Israel, and then coming under the authority of the Palestine Authority in 1994. Both Jordan and Israel regarded the festival as a militant expression of Palestinian nationalism and banned large celebrations at the shrine and in Jerusalem. Actually, the British in 1939 banned, curtailed and limited and truncated celebrations in Jerusalem, and they barred any of the large processions into the city. So that signature feature of everyone entering the city and leaving the city was now eliminated. And then, so it was already curtailed by 1936, by 1939. And the Jordanians and the Israelis curtailed it further. The festival, though, was revived in the 1990s under the rule of the Palestine Authority, who attempted really to revive a memory of the festival as an emblem of Palestinian nationalism. Yet, even here again, we continue to see the distinction between official leaders who wish to make the festival a political statement and pilgrims who see the festival as an opportunity to practice mystical forms of Islam or focus on the veneration of the tomb. This strong nationalist identity at the festival appeared through the scouts who arrived from all over the West Bank, as well as political speeches that stressed the Palestinian Authority rhetoric of a two-state solution, or a state in Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital, adhering to the model of a two-state solution. Appearances of the Palestinian flag, even regular attendance of Abu Naftullah, the Archbishop, the Orthodox Bishop of Sebastia, evoke a multi-confessional Palestinian identity that is culturally Arab and inclusive of its Christian minority. Yet the Sufi or Islamic mystical orders who had long enjoyed worshiping at the shrine continued to focus on their religious pursuits. The Sufis were largely uninterested in these speeches and instead focused on worshiping in a common devotional way, playing music and chanting and evoking God's name in dhikr ceremonies in close proximity to the tomb of Moses. This proximity to the tomb represents the essence of pilgrimage, needing to remain as close as possible to Moses's tomb, the source of barakah, something that could not be derived from speeches, but only from esoteric spiritual pursuits. They perform these Sufic rituals unconcerned about the speeches and performing them directly in the mosque, where you can see other Muslims even were unfamiliar with these practices and took interest in them. So Tawfiq, you'll let me know if you can't hear it, but it should be, here they are performing it. Tawfiq, you could hear that?
Well, thank you. Yes, indeed.
Okay, and this is inside the mosque. What I find interesting is that you could tell other Muslim worshippers or pilgrims who came were unfamiliar with these practices and took a great interest in watching them. Another aspect of this division between the worship of pilgrims and the official ceremonies led by the Palestine Authority was the devotion more rural women displayed. Women often touched the tomb, touched the sacred banners, believing these sacred objects possessed barakah. Other women performed folk dances that was to some considered inappropriate. In the days before the festival, I heard one Islamic official instruct the guards of the shrine to prevent women from praying in front of the tomb of Moses, something he described as a jahili practice, a pre-Islamic practice, antithetical in Islam for praying to a human rather to God alone. In fact, when I was there a couple days later, I saw one woman attempting to pray in front of the tomb. She began to pray, which upset some of the pilgrims. And you see her here praying, and I happened to capture the video of it. And you can hear one woman saying to her, "Mafi," meaning there's none of that here.
حكيت معك قبل
So clearly not something other people shared. Quickly, recently the Turkish government has funded renovations at the shrine. In the bid that the Turkish President Erdogan has made to appeal to a Muslim audience, as the activities of the shrine now include Turkish whirling dervishes and troops replicating Janissary bands. So we can see through these examples after 1948 that they reveal throughout its long history, the Nebi Musa festival has emerged as one scholar of ritual rites, a symbolic system created in history to meet the changing historical concerns of its participants and organizers. Thank you very much for being patient in almost a 45-minute presentation, and thank you for your attention. I'll stop sharing the screen here.
Well, thank you, Dr. That was Dr. Awad Halabi speaking about the Nebi Musa festival in its early days, and actually he brought us up to the contemporary period, and I'd like to really congratulate him for really providing a very well organized, well researched, and very immersive experience in this festival, which may not be so familiar to folks, and including those who study Palestine today. So I'd like to thank him for that. In preparation, so this comes to the period of basically where we go through questions and answers. Basically, the audience has an opportunity to voice questions. So if you do have those, please put them in the question and answer section. But I had a couple that sort of I wanted just to start to warm you up and to sort of just actually perhaps get some clarifications myself. This is probably a minor theme in your talk, but I just wanted a bit of clarification on it because there were a lot of concepts there that were quite densely put together when you speak about the slapping festival or the slapping rites. Can you clarify what you were getting at there? Because it just went a little bit over my head. I was a bit astonished by it.
The slapping ceremony is a rite that was conducted when Babylon was under foreign rule. And for the Babylonians, it caused the potential for cosmic chaos, that there would be a foreign king ruling. And so the slapping ceremony, the priest asks the king questions. Did you allow the walls to be breached? And he would slap him and the king would reply, I did not allow the walls to be breached. Did you allow others armies to enter our land? I did not allow armies to enter the land. So it was a way to reconcile that contradiction between the ideal and the reality. And it was a ritual to say, no, this is the reality. Even though you're not meeting the ideal, this is, we want to make it appear that this is, to make it appear palatable and acceptable in a way. And so that's what it tried to reconcile those contradictions between ideal and reality. And so I evoke it at the time at the Ronald Storr says he realized that at the Ras and Amud Pavilion, it would show everyone that 400 years of Ottoman rule had ended. There wouldn't be a greater public expression of the end of Ottoman rule than at the Ras and Amud Pavilion. And so he said, we need to get involved and to make address that the ideal was Arab independence and Islamic rule, but the reality is foreign Christian European rule. And so by joining the ceremonies, they breach those contradictions. And really, that's what a lot of rituals try to accomplish. As one scholar of ritual says, look at this this is the way it should be, not the reality.
Right. Well, certainly a strong feature of your presentation is the way in which this ritual becomes this space for attempts by different powers and parties to sort of ride the backs of and utilize the powers that be there, while at the same time you're also saying that there's a lot of parallel worlds actually going on there. So not everyone is going there with their own agendas, while those in power and throughout history are trying to sort of ride the horse of this. And I think you were very effective in showing Ottoman, British, and you actually, your research doesn't go beyond the 48 period, but you certainly hint to that when you speak to even how in contemporary times the Turkish, contemporary Turkish state is actually actively engaged in this ceremony. So, you know, the ceremony is, the tomb of Nabi Musa tomb is actually got in the news about a year ago.
Yeah.
And this is the way it got into the news most recently for our audience members was a fairly well-known Palestinian young DJ, techno DJ who made her name on the Boiler Room, which is apparently a very big techno scene. Apparently, she was trying to film some kind of video performance at the Nabi Musa site, and locals who were in the area heard about it and apparently and shut it down, believing that there was some sort of rave or something going on in this site. And they trashed a lot of the elements of, you know, her equipment, I guess, as well as some of that renovation that had been done by the, I'm not sure by the Turks, but certainly by the Palestinian Authority. And it came to light afterwards that the Palestinian Authority itself had actually attempted to sort of create some kind of, you know, sort of a pilgrimage hostel or even a tourism site about out of it. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that event. If you, I mean, obviously it's a little unrelated to what you spoke about, but it's a bit more that sort of hooks us into the more contemporary history. Go ahead.
I'm sorry that I forget her name. It's not, but she was like thrown under the buses. That's the way I would describe it. She was recruited, hired by the PA to make this promotional video. And they were, as you say, they were going to turn to part of the shrine could be turned into a kind of hospice or hostel. And this was part of the promotional video, but yet it was local young men who thought that it was a rave and that it was something very haram. And so they attacked it. They congregated and trashed the furniture that they had bought to promote this as a tourist site and provide you accommodations. And sadly, she was blamed and she was even arrested, though I think arrested to detain for her own safety. So it's very Sama Abdul Hadi. Thank you, Sarah. And it was very sad. And the thing is, the PA during the Nabi Musa festival that they organized regularly hold more quote unquote secular activities there in terms of political speeches. It's not all religious, even certainly folk dances or performances by other cultures and other dance troupes. So they largely blamed her for this event. Yeah.
Can you actually clarify? Because if I'm not
the local tribe, someone said. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, thanks for the input from folks. But is the actual site in I believe it's in an area C, is that correct?
Yeah, this is great. So the Palestinians,
explain please, yeah.
Palestinians enter with their flag and Palestinian security will be there. but it's Area C, which is under Israeli control, and the area around it is a military zone. So that's what has always prevented pilgrims from going there freely. But in the Oslo Accords, one section of it grants permission to the Palestinians for certain religious sites to enter with their flag, in defiance of regular Area C regulations that would prevent Palestinians from raising their flags. So in a way, for the PA, it is liminal space because it makes it appear like it's Palestinian territory, but it's really Area C, fully under Israeli control. Only through the sufferance of the Israelis are they given permission to raise their flag and to have security there.
Which is quite an amazing thing if you think about it. Simply like a building and a structure that is Area C inside its walls, but everything around it is there, you know, it's
Yes.
Israeli controlled and Israeli military area. And even Area C is not supposed to have any Palestinian government presence there.
Right.
But
yes.
can we read from that a kind of attempt, some sort of continuity between the past and the present, and sort of using these sort of symbolic sites as places where a kind of autonomy can be, or power can be performed, albeit one that might not be real?
It's a ritual sleight of hand. It's a way to make it appear that no PA authority member is going to get up to the podium and say, thank you to the Israelis for letting us raise our flag and enter with our PA officials and talk about Jerusalem as our capital. That only exists because the Israelis permit them. But it is very much a strong PA Palestinian narrative, and stressing the narrative of that nationalist movement. But yet it doesn't fully acknowledge the reality they're living under.
Well, thank you for those answers and putting that sort of extra bonus material into your answers. So I'd like to transition into some of the questions that we've got, and a reminder, put them in the question and answer, but we have a couple now. The first one comes from John Munayer, if I get the name correct, and he thanks you for the presentation and asks, to what extent did Christians and Jews participate in the festival? If they did take part, what type of dialogue arose from this?
You know, it's really interesting. For me, Jerusalem's Christians and Jews are, in the modern period, as it becomes centered in Jerusalem, they become part of the audience. They are participating organically as an audience watching the festival and really reveling in their Muslim neighbors attending and seeing. And there are many accounts of Jerusalem's Jewish and Christian Jerusalem's Jewish and Christian residents talking about how much they remember watching the celebrations, participating in them, sometimes marching in them, but the Jewish residents sprinkling rose water on as the Hebron pilgrims entered the city and passed by the Jewish quarter. In a way, many of the Muslim pilgrims were an audience because they were there to validate what the elite political leaders were propagating. European consuls and European officials were there as a way to recognize that Jerusalem is really under the authority of the Ottomans at a time when it was under so many knew that it was that the Europeans coveted ruling Jerusalem. And a third audience is the native Arab, Jewish and Christian populations of Jerusalem who remember it fondly. And Christians would go on to be involved with it in many ways. Many times the Arab Executive Council or political leaders would invite Palestinian Christians to attend. Many times you hear stories of Christians marching with their Muslim neighbors from Hebron or Nablus. In one instance, a speaker praises Salah ad-Din as the starting the festival to protect Jerusalem. And the journalist tells us that the Christian neighbors from Hebron who joined the procession cheered Salah ad-Din, and that they defied this communal boundary between Christian and Muslim memory of Salah ad-Din, that he was there, he was part of their culture and as well. And the Christians participated so much, the British had to pass regulations that it was not permitted for non-Muslims to go to the Haram al-Sharif during certain religious holidays. In one instance, Khalil Sakakini was going to give a major speech at the Haram during the festival, but the British barred him, non-Muslims, from attending.
Well, thank you for that answer. I'll comment that the second question from Elizabeth Martin actually echoes the similar question of wanting to ask you to shed light on the Christian. Do you happen to know if Palestinian Christians visited the shrine on other days as well, and now or in the past? And is the shrine of Nabi Musa a mixed shrine, like some shrines of the Virgin Mary or St. George al-Khadr, which is near Bethlehem, of course?
Largely, Christians, native Palestinian Christians, do not really necessarily revere it as a site, as a holy site. It hasn't been promoted as such, or it doesn't happen organically. I think it's out of respect to the Palestinian Christian population and the nearby shrines that are under the authority of Bishop Abdullah, or he's associated with it, Atullah Hanna, that he's invited. But Palestinian, I think Christians would revere the site of Mount Nebo, overlooking the Holy Land in Jordan, where Christian and Jewish traditions say that that Moses, that's his final resting place before crossing, only seeing it before he died, but not really widespread. Al-Khadr and the Virgin Mary Shrine, they attract Muslims and Christians together. They're very powerful sites of interaction between them.
Yeah, well, thank you for those clarifications. And the last question, the previous question, not Elizabeth, but the one before, had actually asked about the question of Jewish participation in the procession. And then your answer to Elizabeth's right now also raised the question of Mount Nebo. So, and we spoke previously about how this area is under the Palestinian Authority in a weird sort of dystopian sort of singular building area, where they're allowed to sort of perform some sort of authority, but only because the Israelis allow them. But can you clarify how Jewish communities, and I'm sure there's not one approach to this, but I imagine it's not recognized as the place where Moses is buried by the majority streams of Judaism, no? And obviously later on how the state dealt with it. So, but that's another story, the state, but at least from the Jewish religious perspective, shall we say?
From the Jewish religious perspective, theologically, Moses died in the desert without anyone knowing the site of his tomb, of his location of his death. And that's largely the Christian theology, and it is a significant number of Muslim scholars as well, who would say, we don't know where Moses died. According to the Torah, he died without anyone knowing the site of his death. So Muslim scholars agreed with that, but Muslim scholars also talked about the site of Moses' tomb in Damascus, or the site of Moses' tomb in Erbil. And so it was al-Harawi, the Persian traveler of the 12th century, if I remember that correctly, that Joseph Mary has translated. That book talks widely about different shrines and tombs of various saints and biblical figures. So Jewish tradition, even though it would say his resting place is unknown, native Jewish residents of Jerusalem honored it and participated in it in a way that Salim Tamari talks about in his book, I believe, from Mountain to Sea, of how reflecting on what Wasif Jawhariya, the musician of the late 19th, 20th century, who left a memoir, talks about Jerusalem in the modern period having these local public celebrations, and they were expressions of communal identity and expressions of new civic identity. And so that's how Christians and local Jews became involved, because these were no longer just exclusively religious celebrations. They were civic celebrations, incorporating political figures, secular political figures, and religious figures. In fact, the 1913 Festival Committee in Jerusalem included figures such as the chief engineer of the city, as well as the representatives, ex officio representatives of the main Christian churches and Jewish community. They were all part of the committee organizing the festival.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Last chance for folks to get a question in. And in the meantime, we've got a question from Martin O'Kane, who thanks you for a really fascinating talk and says, I want to ask, were there any particular Quranic texts that were commonly used or recited during these ceremonies?
The one main one is the sobriquet of Moses, Musa al-Kalim, Allah. Moses, he who spoke with God. And so that Quranic verse appears on the banner of the Prophet Moses with the Shahada on the reverse side. Actually, in the 16th century, one Ottoman Sultan sponsored a banner that said, La ilaha illallah, Musa Kalim Allah. Moses, the one who spoke with God. And so that was a very powerful text that was repeated in banners, and that was the main one. What I think is also interesting, there aren't really any like shrines, other Muslim shrines. There are hagiographies, stories celebrating these saints. There really isn't necessarily those stories circulating, but there are always stories circulating of miracles performed at the shrine, or apparitions of a ghostly figure appearing, or if inappropriate interaction between a man and woman that would shake the ground, or it would stir whirlwinds at the shrine, and it could be very cold at night and windy as well. So those association of karamat, of miracles and wonders as they're known, circulated widely.
So just to clarify here, Musa Kalim Allah, the Musa the one who speaks with God, it's a kind of invocation for the...
It's what he's known as. That's his title.
Right.
Taken from the Quran.
Sure, but so for those attending the procession, okay, of course, there's the civic and the political dimensions to it, but the deeper religious signification, particularly for this Sufistic tendencies, the mystical tendencies who would adopt such an approach, which is not necessarily mainstream, but what are they trying to get at Musa's tomb? You see?
The barakah.
The barakah.
It emits barakah, blessings. And so to be the heightened point of that barakah is during an annual maulid, the time of their death, or the festival that recognizes honors their death. And so it's the source of barakah, gaining that proximity to the tomb. And even though there are many accounts of coffee houses set up, even puppet shows at the shrine, the Bedouin arts of falconry even, and horsemanship, so many accounts tell us that once prayers were conducted or Sufi rituals were conducted, people watched respectfully or participated widely, so that it was this sacred space as a source of barakah. And the covering, the sitter, the covering of the tomb was itself a source of barakah, where women fashion it, cut pieces of it, fashion it into a cup for their sick children to drink from.
You've been listening to Dr. Awad Halabi, who is speaking on the topic of Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem from 1850 to 1948. I would like to really thank you for such a rich and fascinating, talk today that shed a lot of light on a lot of new and interesting topics. You were able to maintain 100% participation from start to beginning, which is a major feat in this age of Zoominars and Zoominar fatigue, shall we say. So
yes.
Fantastic.
I thought everyone had it up to here with Zoom.
We all are, but to some extent there are some great benefits of it, because we had this great discussion, and also it will be preserving this for history's sake. But please don't allow that to prevent the folks in the audience from picking up the book that will be coming out at the end of this year. That will be the Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem, 1850 to 1948, from the University of Texas Press. You've been listening to a webinar from the Council for British Research in the Levant. Please check our website out. That's at cbrl.ac.uk, where you can sign up to our mailing list, see what we do. So thank you for all audience members. And of course, thank you to Dr. Halabi himself for this fascinating talk. And thank you today for your audience for hanging out today. And please have a very pleasant evening. Take care, folks.
Thank you again, Tafi, and thank you to everyone for their kind comments and staying on board.
Bless up. All the best, folks. Take care.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Yes,
I'll
indeed.
see you soon.
Indeed. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.